Well, we've seen the first-hand effects of the migrant situation here in El Paso, which at times has been the center of the crisis.
Yeah, joining us now in the studio, El Paso Congresswoman Veronica Escobar. Congresswoman, thank you for being here. This is a busy time at the border. Let's begin by talking about the situation in Eagle Pass in South Texas, Lukeville, Arizona, also an issue right now. But let's talk about what's been described as a mass migration event that's happening right now.
Yeah, it is absolutely overwhelming CBP officials. I am certain that it's probably overwhelming the capacity within those two communities. And it is something similar to what we saw last year in El Paso. Just as the Title 42 was about to be lifted, we saw the smuggling organizations, really run largely by cartels, tell people that now was the time, that they needed to arrive at the border, present themselves as quickly as possible. Of course, they pocket the money, they bring people to the border, and then it is communities like ours, CBP agents and other receiving communities that then have to address the challenge that comes with those really high numbers.
And now that we've learned that the state of Texas has also started flying migrants to sanctuary cities, we know the first flight arrived in Chicago on Tuesday. It actually left El Paso Tuesday afternoon. We know 120 migrants were on board, arriving at Chicago's O'Hare Airport a bit later in the day. You were mentioning that you're hearing from your colleagues in Chicago about that situation. What have you learned about that? What are they telling you?
That's right. In fact, I received some communication today from one of my colleagues who's a representative, a congressional representative in Chicago. And the challenge for them is that the state of Texas is doing this without any coordination. So that makes it really difficult for them in the receiving communities as well. You know, they don't have federal personnel there to help address the issue. And what we now know, of course, that Congress has not passed the supplemental funding that is going to communities like Chicago, El Paso, other communities, and it's being held up in Washington. So it is a real challenge for them there as well.
Congresswoman, what would you say, though, to supporters of the busing program or even the flights? What would you say to them when they say that, look, including Governor Abbott, right, that's his rationale, that border communities shouldn't shoulder the burden alone, right? So now he is saying we're sending migrants who want to go to Chicago, want to go to New York, to their final destination where they want to be, so that other communities can deal what Texas is dealing with.
You know, I think that those are kind of two different groups. I think for constituents and for members of border communities, many of them think, you know, it's important to make sure that they move on. We don't have the resources to provide for folks here in El Paso. We've seen you know, people sleeping on the streets. We know that our shelters are at capacity. They've been beyond capacity. But that's very different from what I think we're hearing from Governor Abbott. And we know Governor Abbott really in many ways is doing this to prove a political point. And I think he's also doing it because it fires up his base. And I think it's really important to know, I don't believe for one moment that Governor Abbott is trying to solve the issue. If he were trying to create a better system, he would have worked together with the Biden administration. But instead, every time the Biden administration proposed a fix or a new policy or proposed a new rule, you saw the state of Texas suing the federal government to stop them from trying to address the situation. So for Governor Abbott, I think it's far more about creating chaos and inciting fear and anger among constituents as opposed to really trying to solve the issue at hand.
You know, you mentioned making political points, and we're hearing a lot of that from both sides here. I mean, this system needs to change. There needs to be changes made. I think a lot of people can agree with that, but I think no one really has a lot of solutions right now. I mean, what is it going to take for this situation to be solved here in our country?
You know, I can tell you, I think I have the solution, and it's not just me. I worked in a bipartisan manner. I extended my hand across the aisle to a Republican colleague, Maria Salazar, a Republican from Miami, who worked very thoughtfully with me over the course of 6 months so that we could address not just the situation in border communities, but beyond, south of us and in the interior. After 6 months, we introduced the bill called the Dignity Act. And the Dignity Act has really good and strong bipartisan support right now. We've been gaining ground within the Republican conference as well as with the Democratic caucus. And we are going one-on-one with our colleagues, meeting with folks. It really, truly presents a solution. It's not everything Democrats want. It's not everything Republicans want. It is a true compromise that addresses our challenges at the border, but also acknowledges that immigration, when managed effectively, is good for our country. There are 8 million unfilled jobs in the United States right now. We need a workforce, but we need an orderly, well-managed immigration system, and that's what the Dignity Act does.
Congresswoman, one final question for you here this afternoon. One final question here today, Congresswoman. So you're talking about compromise, and compromise in modern day Washington, a steep hill to climb, as you, I'm sure, know. But let's talk about what's happening in the Senate and the White House right now, which is talks to change the asylum system, to begin some sort of manner of addressing what some say is a loophole in the asylum system. The White House open to some changes. A lot of people on the left, a lot of Democrats saying absolutely not. Where do you stand when it comes to those changes in the asylum system that might address what we're seeing right now on the border?
I think it is so important to understand that it's not just the border that needs reform. It's the entire system. And part of what has been so broken in terms of our system is that for decades, Congress has only wanted to focus on the border. They've not wanted to address the overall immigration system. Congress has looked for quick and easy fixes. There's no quick and easy fix to a complex issue. I am all for bipartisan compromise. I've demonstrated it with the work that I've done on the Dignity Act in the House. But if the Senate is looking just to address the border, we are going to have to come back and continue the work on the overall system. And I can tell you, Robert, we have tried rapid expulsion programs as a country before. All that the rapid expulsion programs do is it fuels more human trafficking, it empowers the cartels, they become richer and more sophisticated, and it doesn't address the overall issue. I know the White House wants Congress to act. They've been telling us it's our job, and they're right. We are the legislators. We're the legislative body that needs to do its job.
Well, Congresswoman, thank you for being here. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
KFOX 14, meanwhile, has also been in touch with Texas Congressman Tony Gonzalez, who represents parts of El Paso as well. He's actually going to be in our studio for a live interview on KFOX 14 Morning News at 7 a.m. If you miss it, you can always watch it after it's over, along with this one as well, on KFOXTV.com.